All right, good morning. Welcome to our July town hall. I think this is number five, perhaps. I'm Alex Sternfeld Dunn. I'm Faculty Senate President and also Director of the School of Music. Special guest, we have some new people on the town hall. So if you haven't been here before, I want to welcome Trish Gandu, who is our UP Senate President this year, and Randy Sessions, our USS Senate President. So welcome to the town hall, both of you. And I especially want to thank President Jay Golden and Provost Muna for joining us today, and for keeping sort of this spirit of communication going in what is sure to be a mundane and boring 125th year at Wichita State. We have a lot of things to get to, so I think let's just get right into it. We've got a lot of questions to get through, and I know if you're watching right now and you have questions, please feel free to put them in the comment box, and we will try to get to as many as we can. The first question I'm going to sort of pose is to President Golden, Jay. As you know, USD 259, some of the other school districts in Kansas have made the decision to delay the start date of their school system starting in September after Labor Day. I'm just curious, is that something that WSU is thinking of doing as well? Or as of right now, are we still talking August, we're ready to go?
Yeah, we're not changing from where we have decided and worked as a campus community for the start date. So as you know, we were probably the first university in the state that made the announcement and switched that no fall break, and that after Thanksgiving break, that students would stay home for those 4 days, finish up, and then do their finals online after that, rather than have to travel back and forth. We also were very proactive, as were others, in regard of universities, to really be proactive in trying to get the personal protective equipment and the barriers and the signage and everything we need across our campus. And I think that's part of the issues that many of the K through 12 institutions have had, in addition to peaks or accelerations in COVID cases, but just for them trying to get their schools prepared. And so we're in a good position right now. And so we're not going to change, especially now as we're so close and families and students have already made the plans and arrangements, as we have as well for our institution. So we're still a go. We're ready. There's signage around the campus. There's the health and safety equipment across the campus. And I'm sure the provost and I will have questions in regards to what we're doing for the protection of the community. But that's where we're at.
Provost Muma, can you share a little bit about us? So for the students who are arriving to campus, more specifically those who may be flying here or coming from out of state, especially from those hotspot areas, will those students be required to shelter in place or quarantine before they're allowed to attend in-person classes or events on campus?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here again. And I want to welcome Trish and Randy in their new roles, and looking forward to working with you this year. So the question is, are people going to need to be quarantined and coming from certain areas in the country and around the world? And the answer is yes. And there's 2 states currently on that list. And you can go to Student Health Services website, wichita.edu/student health, and click on international and domestic travel. There's a link there, FAQ there, that outlines that information. But those individuals will need to be quarantined for 14 days. And that's why we allowed for students to move into housing a little bit sooner for that purpose. And individuals who need to do that will be notified by the Housing Residence Life. There are some students who are living off campus who are not allowed from those states to move into apartments. And so we are providing information on local hotels who discounted their rates in order for them to stay there before they move into their apartments. We won't be quarantining those individuals. And also on that site, you'll see a list of other places in the world that they aren't going to allow any travel to the United States. So that's going to affect some international students who are wishing to start this fall. But anyway, the best place to look for that information is at the student health website, wichita.edu/student health.
Okay, we've got a question for President Golden. It's we've heard examples of various types of schools and businesses that are expecting or asking their employees and students to sign a liability waiver to not hold the school or the business legally responsible if they catch COVID, supposedly at the school or the business. Are we looking at the possibility of something along those lines?
No, not currently. We're not. I would never say never, right? We just don't know from the state or other institutions that are going to require state agencies to do something like that. But we're not proactively doing that. But as we also know, too, I think in the latest version of what the Senate put forward for additional CARES-like funding, I believe there's some provisions for liability for agencies and employers. I don't have really all the specifics, but to go back to your question, we're not planning right now to have people sign a waiver.
Great, thank you.
Just to quickly follow up on the previous question about quarantine, Rick, there was a question that came up in our comments that I thought would be worth addressing, which is there any chance that that list of states and countries that are going to require quarantine could change between now and the start of the semester?
I guess it's always possible, Alex, given the spread of the virus. That's why I suggest that if people are interested in knowing what those changes might be, is to check Student Health's website. They update it continuously, or you can also go to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment's website. They have that information as well. So yeah, this is always possible. Things are changing on a daily basis in terms of this virus. So definitely.
I think it's safe to say, sort of in this current environment, that you should have sort of a list of websites that you check daily, like you do read the daily news, because everything seems to be changing so often to keep up to date. So thank you, Rick. Trish, I'll turn it over to you. I think you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks. So Provost Muma, will Wichita State continue to follow the recommendations of Sedgwick County Health Office as they put those out to limit gathering sizes, even though schools we've typically been exempt from those orders? Will we continue to follow those recommendations?
Well, let me just make something a little bit clearer here, that we're not exempt from the order. We are an essential entity that is allowed to continue to operate during these times, and particularly when there's a stay-at-home order. But we're not exempt from gathering sizes and those sorts of things. There's some nuances here, and we're going to have some more detailed information when we communicate more broadly to the campus about various different issues and getting back to school starting on the 17th. But just in general, because I know a lot of people are concerned about this, in terms of events that we would have, like in student affairs or other kinds of gatherings, we are going to be required to limit gathering size to 15 people. There's some more nuances with that as well. It is allowed where you can have 15 people who are commonly known to each other to gather in the size of groups of 15, as long as they're wearing masks and practicing hygiene. But they can also be other groups of 15 in a larger room, not to exceed 2,000 people. So we'll try to make that more clear. In terms of classroom size, we're really sticking to our plans that we've already put in place in terms of social distancing and not allowing more students into each of those areas that would not allow for social distancing. So in some cases, there will be more than 15 students in a classroom. In all cases, whether we're talking about an event or a class, everybody should be wearing masks and will be required to do so, and practice hygiene, hand washing, those sorts of things.
So I think a follow-up kind of question to this, thinking about how the counties are updating their procedures, and a question that's come up a few times is, do we have a plan in place if there is a case of COVID on our campus, or multiple cases, or even an outbreak, how that will be communicated to Wichita State faculty and students and to the larger community?
Well, I want to just point out that we're already providing that communication. It's on our website. If you go to COVID-19 news, wichita.edu/COVID-19, and you click on, I think there's a link that says data reporting. We've already made that notification. But in general, what happens, and because we don't know who everybody positivity status. Some people may be testing and not letting us know. But when we do know that, we let the people who need to know that know, and the people in that particular working area. There won't be any broader kinds of notification to campus, at least at this point. And then to get to your other part of your question, what will we do with that data and so forth? And I think it leads into another question that you may want to be asking a little bit later, or we can answer it now. But in terms of whether we would go to total remote or virtual, we'll be making that decision with the health department, because really our campus is the community. We, by and large, don't have a lot of students compared to other universities living on campus. Most of our students are living out in the community. So in order for us to make a decision based on whether we have positive cases on campus or an outbreak in a particular area on campus, we'll be working closely with the health department. That's what we've been doing all along, to make a decision whether we would go to remote. I do want to let everybody know that we do have cases on campus, and we're managing those through our protocols that we've established in student health and working with the health department.
So you mentioned testing. You brought it up that somebody might be testing. And a question that's come up quite frequently and just came up in our chat is, at this time, does WSU have any plans to do testing of students, faculty? I know KU announced that they were going to test everybody on the first day. What are our sort of plans around testing on campus?
I'll start, and then Jay might want to add information here too from his knowledge of what he's been talking to the regents about. But we already have a testing plan in place, and currently what we're doing now is testing symptomatic individuals, students only. Employees are being tested by their healthcare provider or through the channels that they would go through if they are reporting symptoms and so forth. So that's what we're doing now, and that's what we're going to continue to do. We will find out soon whether there's going to be some sort of requirement by the Board of Regents to require what people refer to as mass testing all students and all employees. We actually are working behind the scenes to develop plans to make sure we're ready if that happens. As you can imagine, there's lots of logistical issues associated with that, because we have 16,000 students. And if you count all of our student workers and GTAs and lecturers, we have about 4,500 employees, and we have to first identify which ones we're going to test, because some of these students are in online courses or taking courses elsewhere. And so we have to determine whether we'll be testing those individuals first. But that is something that is a possibility. And Jay, you might want to chime in here at this point.
I got some stuff. So it's interesting because we have both what institutions within the Board of Regents, the Regent universities, are talking about. And for this community, I'm going to be with my fellow presidents next week and the Board of Regents for a few days at a retreat where we're going to be talking about all this. And then I'm also discussing with presidents around the country, and it's a very interesting dynamic in regards to what people are planning. There is no set prescribed course of action for all universities, let alone other, K through 12, et cetera. Some of my colleagues who have, let's say, small liberal art colleges in the middle of a rural area where they're probably going to be mostly online, but they know that student population on campus, they can contain it. Maybe it's 1,200 students. They'll test them before they get on campus, and they're not letting them leave the campus, basically. That makes sense. For universities such as ourselves, which have a high commuter, which are in large urban centers, you could test, they can go back home or go to work and then come back, and that test tells you at that point of time where they're at. So we're trying to blend all of that. I do also want to let the faculty and staff know, it's public knowledge. We have a contract with one of the labs for the testing for us. Our concern is, like everybody else, over a period of time, that backlogs could happen. So we put forward funding for equipment. We have partnerships with Ascension Health, with other leaders within epidemiology and clinical labs, both on campus and off campus, to have our own lab for testing, a saliva-based testing lab that is still very much in the early stages at best, I believe, right now, because the supply chain backlogs across the country. We'd be looking at the end of October for all the licensing, testing, and quality assurance, quality control. So we would have the benefit, once it's up and running, to be able to do our own analytics and quick prioritization turnaround, while also benefiting our region and having a source within Wichita. This would be an off-site testing facility. More to come. I'll be providing to the community greater information as it develops. But I just use that as an example of, we are doing all that we can, and we want to continue to engage both our thought leaders on campus as well as health professionals and other thought leaders off campus to ensure that we're doing all that we can for a safe and healthy campus moving forward.
Thank you for that update, and we'll see what happens with that. But I know from a faculty and I think a staff point of view, there's a lot of concern about testing, so hopefully we can make something like that happen. There's also been a great deal of conversation about masks and expected versus required, and I know we have some updates on that. So Randy, I think you have a question that might actually help some of those in the chat give some clarification. So I'll toss it to you, Randy.
Yeah, thank you. This is for the provost. It's been made fairly clear that everyone should be wearing a mask when they're on campus. Can you provide more details about the current mask policy and specifically what to do if someone is not following the guidelines?
Thank you, Randy. So we'll be releasing a policy. It's in draft right now. It's been vetted by a whole bunch of people, including the Health and Safety Committee that's been working on health and safety issues. And because of new orders in the city and the county about masks, and of course we know that masks actually are sort of a last line of resistant to the virus, and actually have been shown to be proven to be effective. We're going to have a requirement for the mask. Now that's a little bit more strict than we started with. When we first started opening back up, we said that it would be the expectations, but we know now that we need to be much more firm about that and require a mask in accordance with these local and state guidelines that are with us. And so what you'll see when this policy is released to the campus, that it will be required. And so let's just talk about students first. So all students will be required to wear a mask wherever they go on campus, in their classroom, RSC, wherever they are. The only exception would be if you are alone in an office by yourself. If a student shows up that doesn't have a mask, we're going to encourage people to have some disposable masks on themselves to give out to individuals, or direct students to locations. There'll be several locations on campus that will have disposable masks for students to get one. Faculty will be able to be pretty firm about this, and if a student doesn't want to do it, then they can ask them to leave the classroom. If that continues to be a problem, then that can be elevated to student conduct. In terms of employees, same thing. Employees will all be required to wear a mask, and unless they're in an office by themselves. And I think there may be also be in the policy, if you're walking outside alone by yourself, you aren't required to wear a mask. That's kind of hard to do. Just my experience walking around campus, even right now, when there's not a lot of people on campus, there's always someone that's real close to you. So that's really not realistic. I think we just need to get used to wearing a mask at all times. If people refuse to do that, then we, in any case, anybody who refuses it, we really need to give people the benefit of the doubt the first time, because it is a behavior that's difficult to get people used to. Wearing a mask is sometimes uncomfortable and so forth. There will be some exceptions for people who have medical issues, and we're not talking about those, and those individuals will have to be able to demonstrate that they have that exception. But if it is an issue, then that also will have to be dealt with through human resources. And we're hoping that we don't get to that point. We're hoping everybody understands if we're going to be safe as a campus, we all need to adhere to this practice. And because we do know that it works, there's plenty of evidence that suggests that. So more information to come about the policy. It'll be a link to information that we will be disseminating early next week about all kinds of reminders for people, not only health and safety, but just the things that people need to be concerned about or aware of when classes start on the 17th.
Yeah, in fact, to just jump in for a second, I want to give kudos to the strategic communications team at Wichita State. They've been for those who haven't been on campus, haven't returned yet, there are signages up around the campus from students and employees talking about why they're wearing masks and why it's important. There's a set of videos that have been made and will be distributed. And we're really trying to approach this as family and protecting the family, your own family, and taking care of your own family, your shocker family. And that will likely include some videos or video at least on how we should approach members of our campus that aren't wearing a mask. And I gotta say, just because someone's not wearing a mask at a particular point, as the provost alluded to, I walk around the campus all day. I reside on campus, and I find myself every once in a while going for a walk and forgetting to have my mask with me and having to go back to the office or the house and get a mask. So those things happen too. So we certainly want to encourage, we want to require the wearing of masks, but we also want to respect our shocker family and make sure that when someone doesn't have it, we remind them of the need to protect themselves and the rest of the campus and their own families.
Yeah, I'll just add too, it's going to be incumbent on all of us. Yeah, there you go. It's going to be incumbent on all of us to get used to when you see someone who doesn't have a mask, to say, hey, just want to let you know that we have a mask requirement on campus. Here's where you can go and get one of those. That's uncomfortable to do, particularly when you don't know someone, but we're going to have to get comfortable doing that and helping each other change this behavior that we need to all be engaged in.
the same way if someone's smoking on campus, we've had that policy, it's just another thing we have to do.
Yeah, thank you. I think, and just to echo, I think it's really important for all of us around campus, if we want people to wear masks, it's to model that behavior ourselves. And, I've always got a mask in my pocket, always walking around with one. So I think that's important. There was a question in the chat that I just very quickly, you said disposable masks were going to be made available. There was a question about who would pay for those disposable masks. Is that going to be at some central place, or are the departments going to be expected to pay for that?
So yeah, the departments aren't going to be expected to pay for that. We're going to have them in locations that are high traffic areas like the RSC, the library, Shocker Hall, I believe, the suites or the flats, one of those areas, the Shocker Locker. It'll be in the communication. I just actually typed all that out last night, and I can't remember exactly every one of them, but there'll be plenty of places for disposable ones. And then there'll be reusable face coverings available in the bookstore. And I believe that'll be in both locations in the RSC and Braeburn. So plenty of places for that. I think I'm just going to have some in my pocket just in case someone needs one, and we'll go from there.
Alex, let me just also answer the second part of your question was, who's paying for it? So we applied for some of the federal stimulus. We applied for a lot of federal stimulus. And so part of that federal stimulus was to support state to support the PPE for the campus so that we wouldn't have people having to pay out of pocket, as well as some of the health and safety, plexiglass barrier, signage, et cetera, for the campus.
Great, thank you. There have been a couple more questions just coming in about our HVAC systems and concerns about aerosols. And, this may be something that just needs to be communicated at a later date. I don't know if any of you feel like experts on HVAC, but one of the questions is sort of just about in view of the emerging research about aerosols, what's the university doing about building safety, ventilation systems like HVAC, but even disinfecting rooms? So either Provost Nova or President Golden, if you have an answer to that, that'd be great.
I can just tell you what I know we have discussed in the Health and Safety Committee. Bob Smith, who's our Director of Facilities, has investigated this. We're adhering to CDC guidelines currently regarding ventilation. We aren't doing anything, at least the latest information that I have. There may be some updated information to adjust any of the ventilation, but his team is actually monitoring that, and if we need to make any adjustments, we will. Again, this is why a mask is so important for everybody to wear, because we're not going to be able to adjust each facility in a way that's going to remove particles from the air. We have a lot of old buildings, so that's why it's so important for social distancing, mask wearing, and practicing good hygiene.
Thank you. Trish, I think you wanted to ask a follow-up question that was coming through in the chat. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, there's several questions in the chat about mask requirements and for our campus partners, the YMCA, NIAR, the others on campus. Like, what are their policies? Are they required to have masks, be wearing masks?
So they are adhering to our guidelines, and some of them are a little bit more stricter. In the internal facilities, or where they rent their space, like let's just use Airbus as an example, they may have some different kinds of things, but any public locations in those facilities are going to be adhering to our standards, and we have communicated all that to them, and we feel like we're in pretty good alignment with that. So at the moment, I don't see any major issues with that.
I want to sort of stay COVID related, but a little time with Provost Numa and myself about some questions really regarding teaching that have come up both in the chat and also prior to our session starting. So I think the first question is, and this was addressed a couple of weeks ago, I think, but there is some question about if a course is designated as a hybrid course, are there going to be a fee? Is there going to be a fee, much like we have on online classes, associated with the hybrid course, or is that something different? So first, I'm just asking you to speak to that.
Yeah, there's no fee associated with hybrid classes, only online courses, fully online courses. And there wasn't any fee associated with it in the spring or the summer, and we have no plans to do that in the fall either. So it's just the courses that were intentionally designed to be offered 100% online. And everybody should understand too that with that online fee, it pays for the entire campus for things like Blackboard, the technology that supports lecture capturing, some of the software that we use for security purposes. And then more importantly, the instructional design piece of it, helping faculty design their courses so they can be delivered. So there's real uses for that fee that we want to continue to be in place for online courses. But for hybrid, there's not an additional fee.
And can you speak a little bit for the students that might be on there, or staff that might have to answer these questions, or even faculty who may be still a little confused? Is there a difference between sort of hybrid versus the remote we've done in the past versus online? What's the difference between all these different models that we're looking at there? And also, if you could address maybe a little bit the online synchronous that we're going to be introducing in the spring. There are a lot of codes to keep track of.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, let's just talk a little bit more about hybrid. Hybrid is likely to be a mix of online activities, could be face-to-face activities like this or through Zoom. It could be in person, a whole mixture of that. It could be entirely like this, which is face-to-face, and fall into that hybrid category. You mentioned synchronous online. That's still a fully online course that assesses this online fee. And the reason why we're making that distinction between synchronous and asynchronous is because some faculty, even though they want to teach in this 100% online environment, want to be able to do so using the course meeting pattern that they identified with their course. And so they want students to be able to do that synchronously. It's still online, still designed in the same way. We have moved all the traditional classroom coding that we had before to hybrid or online. So there's just those two major categories, and that's how the curriculum is going to be offered for at least this next academic year.
And just to provide some further clarification, because this came up earlier, if we end up having to go to shelter in place in the fall, we're not going to change all the courses suddenly to an online code and then start charging a fee. Whatever code the class is coded at is right now is the code that it would stay at.
Yeah, so we're not going to start charging fees on hybrid courses. We've never done that. We didn't do that in the spring. We didn't do that in the summer. We're not planning to do that this next academic year.
I think there's another question sort of, at the beginning of the summer, a lot of faculty went in and entered into a survey, hey, this is how we're going to plan to teach our class in the fall, versus, there might be like half the class on this day, lots of creative solutions that have come up. We're getting closer to the semester. Things have certainly changed in our city and in our county, and faculty might be rethinking that. and may not want to actually do it the way that they originally thought they were going to. Is there a way for a faculty member to update that survey response so that the students know what to expect? And just a very quick follow-up, how should I be communicating to my students what even the beginning of classes are going to look like?
Yeah, so I don't know, earlier in the summer, Carolyn Shaw, who's Associate Vice President in my office, communicated to faculty and provided them several different links of what they should be doing in terms of communicating to students. And so your first part of your question is, what if faculty want to change what they're doing in light of what's going on? So that, let's say they earlier communicated to students, and by the way, Carolyn sent a link to the faculty to go to a Qualtrics survey to identify how they were going to be offering their course if it was hybrid. And so that all that information is online right now at wichita.edu/fall 2020 for those faculty who have responded to that. And we've had a pretty good response rate, but not everybody's done that. So please go back to that message. We will communicate that information out to the faculty again in our communication next week to remind them to do that if they haven't done that. But if they want to change, they can do that. So let's say they, in their hybrid course, that they were going to do some in-person kinds of activities, and they thought, that's a little bit, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. I'm going to switch it to some sort of face-to-face kind of teaching method, like what we're doing right now. And so they would have the opportunity to go back and change that. And so if there's any students listening to this right now, I'd encourage you to go to that website that was just posted, wichita.edu/fall 2020, and look up your classes and see how they are going to be offered. I also asked the students to do a couple of things. So that's one thing. The other thing is to log on to Blackboard, and those should have access to that once they get enrolled and pay their bills and all that. They will have access to Blackboard, and there'll be additional notes from faculty in there. To faculty, what I'd ask you all to do, for those of you who are listening, and encourage you to share this information with your colleagues, is to reach out to your students as soon as you can. Starting next week would be great. I understand there's lots of anxieties that people have, uncertainties, and the more connections that we can make with them, with students early on, the better, and it'll make for a much better start of your class, and the students will feel much more comfortable, and I think you will too, just so you can communicate that information to the students. So those are some things, Alex, I think that are important for people to understand, of where to go look for the information, and for faculty to communicate to their students as soon as possible.
There are a couple of questions about this. We've been talking about sort of online virtual instruction. So we know that they're going to, the question that came up in the comments, we know a number of online classes are being held. Does this give us any gauge of maybe how many students are even going to be on campus, and how many students might be living in residence halls?
I have some estimates for that. Well, in terms of residence halls, right now we're about 80% occupancy. And we actually feel pretty comfortable with that, and that allows us also to have some space where we can use for quarantining students if we need to do that. So 80% is about 1,200 students roughly in housing. So we'll see where we end on the first day of class. The students are already being allowed to start moving in to housing, trying to spread that out instead of doing that over a couple of days, to do that over a couple of weeks. 87% of our courses that will be offered this fall are hybrid. So, there's a mixed method approach to those courses, and about 13% are fully online. We estimate, given the surveys that we've done, and faculty have let us know how they're going to be offering their course, that any time, we think about 40% of our classes will have some face-to-face offerings. So there'll be definitely less people around, but still plenty of people around. But again, that's the point. We want to spread things out. We want to spread people out, so we're pretty confident that we're able to do that in our methods that we've put out there so far.
Another question around teaching and being in the classroom that came up way earlier in the comments, but was asked by a faculty member in my own department, Dr. David McDonald. Essentially, all the information we've been getting about classroom quota sizes has been with the assumption that we were going to be sort of in a phase 3. Do you think 2 weeks or 3 weeks away from the beginning of classes starting, is that the classroom quota we should be expecting? Or is a phase 2, phase 1 quota maybe more likely? And I think just sort of a follow-up, is it possible that those quota sizes might change in the middle of the semester?
Yeah, so this is sort of a difficult topic to navigate here. And remember, I said early on, what we've been talking about in terms of what we're doing in the classroom is not new. I saw that in the chat. What's new is that the virus has become more prevalent out in the community, and that's changed. It's going to be real difficult for us in mid-semester, short of moving everybody to a remote option or a remote format or course, if there's still going to be face-to-face requirements to change around the configuration of the classroom. We will obviously look at the possibility, if we need to do that, to spread out students into other classes, nearby classes. We actually purchased some software that allows us to simulcast content to other nearby classrooms. So if we need to do that, we'll work through that. But right now, in terms of the size of students in the classes, we're adhering to that social distancing guideline and making sure everybody's wearing a mask and practicing good hygiene. Again, we're monitoring it on a daily basis, and if we need to make a pivot, we will. Obviously, we'll work with the faculty very closely, like we have been, to help navigate that and determine the best way to do that. But right now, we're not changing those class sizes.
Thanks. One more question for now on sort of teaching, and then I think we want to move on to some other topics as well. One of our faculty members brought up sort of all the anxiety and stress that this is bringing up for a lot of people. And it was great. Someone pointed out in our chat about the EAP resources for faculty and staff for stress, anxiety. Similarly, for our students, we have testing and counseling, so there are a lot of support systems. But a question that has come up is we know that there are some students who might feel anxious about being back on campus, and they really want to be in that class virtually. And the faculty members designated it as some components in person, all of it in person. And how does the faculty member go about navigating that? How does a student go about requesting that? So if there are any answers to that, I think that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, so the questions have come up a lot lately about accommodating students who don't feel comfortable being in class. And what I'll just say about that, in order for us to make sure that we go through the proper channels and determine the issues around accommodations, if a student feels like they need to be accommodated because of COVID-19, they need to have a conversation with the folks in disability services, and they're the ones that will determine if that's the case, if they will be granted that accommodation. Unfortunately, just because someone is having some uncertainties about whether they want to be in class or not because of COVID-19, that may or may not be a reason to accommodate a student. However, a faculty member, and we would encourage faculty members to have these conversations with students who are concerned, may at any time allow that student to learn in a remote or virtual environment along with the class that is in a face-to-face environment or an in-person environment. So we would strongly encourage individuals to do that. Also, the issue that is a part of this is that there may be students who become ill, either to COVID-19 or seasonal flu, or they don't know and they're not able to get a test or not be able to get their result back. We do need faculty to work with those students just like they would with any other student who might become ill during the course of any semester that they've had in the past. We would expect faculty to work with them through that process. As you know, we have COVID-19 right now, but starting in October, when seasonal flu becomes more of an issue in our community, that's also going to complicate things a little bit. And that's the reason why we are ending in-person instruction the Friday before Thanksgiving and then having the last 4 days of instructional activity to be offered in a remote or virtual online environment, including finals. And we won't be coming back for the regular start of the semester until February 1st, and that's primarily due to this complication with seasonal flu. So these are all the things that people need to have conversations about and have further discussions among faculty in their faculty meetings, among dean-led meetings, and so forth.
And Alex, there's a lot of ifs that we have to have some grace and compassion for. Someone could have a partner or a spouse or a child that becomes ill, right? And you need to take care of them, let alone be quarantined for those periods of time. And there's just a lot of things that could come up. I know the provost and I just want to really articulate to our faculty and also for supervisors with faculty and staff. Have some grace, have some understanding. We have to work through these things together because there are many unknowns. But the number one priority has to be the protection of our campus, our Shocker community. So let's address it that way.
And Alex, I'll just add here too, there will be some faculty and staff who will be in that same sort of situation, and we're asking them to work through HR to work through that particular issue with them. And I just also want to mention that we're still going to be in staggered office staffing mode and hours, and so we're going to be communicating to the campus and reminding them and providing that information of how they need to, what methods they need to use to get in touch with offices and services on campus. By and large, there'll be people in offices, limited staffing. There will be some situations in offices that have only one person where that may not be possible, but there will be opportunities for them to get in touch with them virtually or to the telephone and so forth.
Yeah, I think the motto should be the 2 C's right now: communication and compassion. We just need to keep doing both of those things, and we will do the best we can. We've talked a lot about sort of health, safety. I know that's on sort of the forefront of everybody's mind. But man, there's some other things going on right now, and budget is one of them. And I want to make sure while we still have a little bit of time, I think Trish has a couple of questions for President Golden about our current sort of budget situation. So I will pass it along to Trish.
Yeah, thank you. President Golden, so recently KU had announced that they would be doing university-wide cuts, and K-State had previously announced that they would be utilizing furloughs across campus to address their budget shortfalls. So with that in mind, can you give us an update on where we are with our university budget?
I guess no one on this town hall expected to be a 2-hour town hall today. We can, on the following one, I'd be glad to come back and give some more depth. But let me just address this straight on, which is KU announced about $120 million deficit for this fiscal year, which started July 1. K-State also has some significant financial issues, as do many institutions. As I talk to my peers, both in our conference and just across the country, through some different programs and associations with, it seems like the further east and the more expensive the institutions are, you hear significant enrollment declines, up to 40%. And then you have institutions that have med schools, hospitals, large athletics, football that are concerned. I say all that because they are facing that for fiscal year 21, which we're in. We are not in that same position. Are we rich with money right now? No. But I do want to give credit to our administration team and departments, et cetera. We were pretty aggressive early on as the pandemic hit, with a lot of steps that we took. We did do furloughs with salary stops for the executive team, some of the head coaches. We stopped travel, discretionary spending, a lot of things. So my message to the campus for this fiscal year, which ends June 30th of 2021, is right now I feel pretty comfortable. Now, could that change? Could there be furloughs in the future? Yes, I don't want to discount the possibilities. The state, probably the biggest risk is if the state came in mid fiscal year and did some type of large cuts. That would predicate us having to do that. Having that not being articulated right now for this fiscal year, I feel comfortable. And we will certainly communicate to the campus immediately if something happens. Where my concern is for fiscal year 2022. We're already going to be starting with a $3 million deficit because what the state did was they provided some of the federal stimulus that they received, they provided to us and the rest of the regional universities. But then they took that away from the recurring state budgets that we normally get. So that gives us a $3 million hit already for fiscal year 2022. We don't know what the economic cycle is going to be. We're waiting to hear. The economy is moving, so we'll have to see. There are national elections that could have, and there's more stimulus. They may free up some of the stimulus by that, removing some of the restrictions for the state, which would be a benefit to us, as well as funds that we and other universities have. But we're planning for fiscal year 2022 as a planning exercise because we were requested to do that from the state budget office for 10% budget reduction for fiscal year 2022. In addition to that, the additional $3 million. So we are going to have our strategic budget committee, which is Pan University, start with the beginning of this new semester to start the planning process for that. Am I saying we absolutely are going to have a 10% or slightly higher budget deficit for fiscal year 2022? No, I'm not saying that. Am I saying that we are going to be innovative and we're going to be aggressive in trying to think through how we would meet that if it did happen? Absolutely. Am I saying we're going to be transparent and we're going to work across the campus for good ideas? Yes. The one thing I'm asking the campus for, though, is if we come up with recommendations, just to say, no, we don't like that, no, we don't want it, is not good enough. Our campus in shared governance has the responsibility to come up with alternative ideas that we can all vet. And so that's why we're going to work across the campus to come up with a plan to meet that 10%, which I hope we don't have to meet. I also want to give a shout out, if you will, across the campus to our strategic enrollment group. As I talked about, some institutions have very large drop-off. We're actually doing very well, better than expected in regard to enrollment. There's also credit hour production and the type of credit hours that we're producing. We're still going to have a shortfall, but I think we're going to be better than expected, and that's due to the strategic enrollment group. It's due to faculty, department chairs, and deans, and administrators and staff that are working really aggressively to ensure we don't have these drop-offs. And I think a lot of that has to do with our innovation spirit, our applied learning. We are the most affordable research institution in the region and across the country for our peers. So that has a lot to do with it.
So as a quick follow-up to that, when do you anticipate the hiring freeze being lifted?
So I think Judy Espinoza has the best term, which is we have a hiring frost right now. And part of it is because we're not in the same position as K-State and KU and other institutions. And so we said at the very outset that things such as health and safety and compliance, we have to do that. We have other positions which are very focused on, say, students, enrollment, those types of activities, and we're still fulfilling some of those. And then we have some strategic hires. But we now have a more stringent process of vetting all the way up, that comes all the way up to the senior leadership, and we review those once a week and make recommendations in denial. So that is happening. I also want to say that we have, in some cases, we are still doing some salary adjustments. Positions people could get recruited from other institutions, and it's actually more expensive for our university to go through that process. We're asking people to do much more in some cases. There's no singular reason for it, but I also don't want the campus to go, oh, I didn't understand why some people got some merit increases. That's still happening, some adjustments, I should say. But that's something that we're keeping a very close eye on, and that could change in a moment's notice depending on what happens with state budgets or the pandemic or enrollment. All those things are variables that we track every morning.
Well, we're almost out of time, not quite, but I know we had a couple more updates we want to share with the campus community. So I'm going to turn it over to you before we reach our
I'll be very
limit,
quick. So I just want to take this time, as faculty and staff, we look for the new academic year. I'm really excited. It's my first fall here, so I can't wait to meet and greet. I'm actually going to be teaching some sessions of courses this semester, so I want to understand and explore the same things that our faculty and staff are doing in regards to the support and interacting with the students, as well as doing research. I will be continuing town halls, likely virtually, but with different departments across the campus and divisions. I think it's really important to be out front and hear concerns and to keep everybody updated on what we're doing besides just the pandemic and budget, but some of the things that will continue to propel our institution. A couple quick things I just want to let people know. I am going to be continuing some task forces. I think it's important to get the entire campus engaged in issues that need to be addressed, some of which are follow-up to the other task forces. So we're going to have a task force on student fees, how we communicate, how they're established, and so that's going to start this fall. I've already mentioned we have a shared governance task force that's going to start this fall as well. I'm going to be asking the campus to come together to look at how we use our facilities, including compression of some buildings. We see that we can work fairly well remotely, and so does that give us the opportunity to take buildings where we're paying for utilities, repair, renovation that maybe we shouldn't be doing anymore, invest in other buildings. So we're going to be taking a look at that. So I'll provide greater detail of those during the other town halls, but I do appreciate it. I really appreciate the campus community for allowing us to do these town halls with the constituent leadership. I think it's important as a university that we have these opportunities to answer questions and give you updates. And I commit to doing that continually throughout this upcoming meeting. Stay healthy, stay optimistic, stay positive. We're in this together.
Yeah, thank you for that. Really, that's our time. I just want to say, I know we didn't get to everybody's questions because, boy, there were a lot. So if you are one that felt like your question hasn't been answered, I want to encourage you to reach out to your Senate president, representative, to get those questions. We all meet with President Golden and Provost Moon on a regular basis. We also have their email addresses, so you can email them. So we want to get this. If you don't feel like your question was answered, send it to one of us and we can get it answered for you, and share that along. Otherwise, keep wearing a mask, keep washing your hands, keep socially distancing, but not emotionally distancing. And I think we'll see you all soon. And I think we're going to have the best possible start to the school year that we can. We're going to see as positive as we all possible. So thank you for your time, everybody, and see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.